Between 80,000 to 85,000 Israeli businesses are estimated to go out of business this year. That's an 85% rise since last year. Israeli businesses are desperate just to keep open and pay their liabilities, let alone earn an income.
People just want to fight for the right to provide, for the right to give the future for the children. What we are talking about, this is what they want, is small businesses. They don't have power to talk with the government, they don't have power to do nothing, just they want to fight for the right of them.
Now, Israeli small business owners are despaired of the regime and are taking matters into their own hands. They are calling for civil disobedience against the regime in the form of defying lockdown measures. They are rebelling against the regime's lockdown as they fear a collapse of their business. Israel just got out of a second coronavirus lockdown in 2020. Many businesses were forced to shut down without compensation, leaving them exposed to financial risks. Many of them succumbed to those risks and have already closed. According to a survey published by US-based business analytics firm Dun & Bradstreet, in the first half of the year, 37,600 businesses in Israel closed, including 1,500 cafes and restaurants and around 450 clothing and shoe stores. The number of closures in the first half of 2020 represents a 70% jump compared to the number of closures in 2019. The restaurant, construction, and transportation industries are among the worst hit, along with fashion stores. Before the coronavirus crisis, Israel had more than 14,000 restaurants, but after the first lockdown, that number fell below 12,000. Business owners say that this lockdown is catastrophic, as Israel went into the first lockdown not knowing what its results would be, but now they know they're destructive. The results of people coming in and out of quarantine and lockdowns are payments withheld, projects stalled, cash flow has ceased, and business owners cannot cover paychecks. According to the Israeli Hotel Association, instead of fighting the coronavirus and developing the economy, the regime has developed the virus and fought the economy. The regime's failure of passing a budget for 2020 has added unnecessary uncertainty in the face of the crisis. It is essential that a budget capable of adapting the tools at the disposal of the central bank to current challenges be approved as quickly as possible, according to the Israeli Central Bank. The political crisis between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his now coalition partner and military minister Benny Gantz has succeeded in yielding no agreement on a budget.
So the atmosphere really among business owners here in Israel is really despair. The business owners have lost a significant amount of their income, of their livelihoods. And unlike people who are employed, business owners actually have set amount of expenses that are still there, that they still have to pay, in addition to the lack of income that they have. So their crisis, their economic crisis and their economic struggle is actually greater, in addition to the fact that the government doesn't have the same benefits and the same income security for freelance workers and for business owners. Business owners really have, I think, we can't really generalize, but I think the main sentiment towards what the government has been done is that they feel like they have been neglected, like they are not seen, like they are really just on the margin of the priorities of the government and of the authorities. I think everyone can say that. Everyone that lost their jobs can say that they are marginalized, that they're not being seen, and that there are no real solutions happening to these people. However, for business owners, that's especially true because most business owners actually lost any kind of source of income. And there are almost zero solutions provided by the government and by the new policies that are being enacted for the COVID-19 crisis. The estimate, I think the latest estimate is that 1 out of 5 businesses, small businesses, will close due to the pandemic. That's 20% of businesses, and that's 20% of families. That's tens of thousands of families that are not only losing their income, they're also losing, their ability to actually secure any kind of income in the future. The uncertainty that this pandemic has presented to us has been unprecedented. We don't have actually any answers. We don't know when this will end. We don't know when businesses will actually go back to normal. So that's a much harder crisis, a much harder situation to deal with as a business owner, because it's not like you have a certain period of time where you don't have a certain income and then you can plan accordingly.
On social media, Israelis talk about fundamental issues. Mark says this regime has killed many businesses, ruined many lives, and has probably caused a massive rise in crime. It has created normalization with others while neglecting normalization at home. Corruption, lies, and deceit are being reported. Where there is smoke, there must be fire. Arlene says synagogues opened some schools, but Likud party Israel Katz, referring to Israeli Finance Minister Katz, and Netanyahu did what they could to injure without supporting business owners, shopkeepers, restaurants, and cafes, the elderly, the poor, the families. The virus is not over yet. More lockdowns will be the future. Avi says Israeli Finance Minister Katz is a disgrace. The Israeli regime needed to provide financial compensation to the businesses harmed while incentivizing them to preserve public health. Columbus Jewish News says some large retail merchandise chains and small shops in Israel are defying the regime's restrictions and opening their doors in protest against the regime's lockdown, which has been disastrous for the economy and individual business owners.
אני יש לי מזל שהשאירו אותי פה ולא הוציאו אותי לחל"ת, שזה לשבת בבית ולקבל 70% או 40% מהשכר, ויש לי מזל שהביאו לי להישאר פה לעבוד, וזה כן פוגע, פחות אנשים באים, אסור לשבת, אסור שום דבר, רק בטייק אווי, לקנות וללכת, וכן, זה פוגע הרבה, ירד פה במחירות 50%. וגם במשכורת שלי, זה יורד לי בשעות.
נגיד שזה משפיע, אין ספק. סגירה לא הייתי אומר, כי אנחנו פחות או יותר צפים מעל המים. בגלל התמיכה שאנחנו מקבלים, וגם פחות או יותר מצליחים איכשהו להרים את הראש מעל המים.
ברור שזה משפיע באיזושהי צורה, תקופה קשה על כולם. אנחנו, ברוך השם, הלקוחות שלנו הגבוהים תמכו בנו ואנחנו עזרנו להם במחירים, אז צעד תומך צעד, אז הסתדרנו בסופו של דבר. יש עסקים שקיבלו את זה אחרת ונסגרו לצערי.
לא, להתייקר אין סיבה, אין סיבה ליוקר, כאילו, כי בקושי גם ככה קונים, אז אתה לא יכול להרים את המחירים ממה שהיה פעם. להפך, אנחנו משתדלים למכור יותר זול גם. פשוט שיבואו, אבל בקושי יש אנשים גם ככה.
Well, it looks like they've been very, very badly hit. The real problem is the strong divisions within Israeli society and the extraordinary concern by Netanyahu about international politics and his lack of real attention to a program for resuscitating and attending to the needs of the basic Israeli society.
Last year, how many attacks did you do?
Last year, of course, I struck no less than 15 attacks because we has nowhere to start from. Sometimes we hijack the ships to get money.
Usually, how much is it to release a ship?
Depends on the ship.
It's due to joblessness. After your years in school, going back home now, you don't have any work to do.
And when you keep the member of the crews, you keep them on the ship, on the boat, or you...
So I've tried for you.
Israel's decision in September to impose a second nationwide lockdown after a resurgence in coronavirus infections has dealt a hammer blow to the economy and the livelihoods of small business owners. Although the lockdown has ended, restaurants and other public places are not allowed to open. The Israeli regime is gradually allowing some to open and imposing fines for those that challenge the regime. Israeli small business owners are despaired of the regime and are taking matters into their own hands. They are calling for civil disobedience against the regime in the form of defying lockdown measures. They are rebelling against the regime's lockdown as they fear a collapse of their business. One of the organizers of this initiative is known as Lo Yehyeh Beseger, meaning there will be no lockdown in the Israeli Hebrew language. It has called on all small business owners in Israel to open their stores and services to the public. It was founded by a group of small business owners a few months ago and has since gained about 60,000 members over Facebook. It is not clear so far how many businesses have joined the rebellion. However, many stores and other small businesses considered non-essential during the pandemic have continued to operate in secret, behind curtains, or have closed doors, defying regime orders. Unrest is growing among small business owners who demand that their operations be allowed to resume right now. During the latest lockdown in Israel, small businesses were left with two choices: rebel against regime orders or tell their landlords they cannot make rent. Many worry that these restrictions will once more intensify. Business owners believe that the regime doesn't understand that businesses will fail. Another month like this, and according to Israeli media, it'll all be over. People who have nothing to lose will stay open.
Government actually has done close to nothing to help the people, and the business owners and employers and employees and everyone that actually has been impacted by this pandemic, economically, socially, and politically. I think the government has really been very, very, very negligent. It's been very disconnected from the needs of the people. It's been very preoccupied with other things. We can see that many tycoons and millionaires are getting millions of shekels in tax exemptions and tax discounts, where this money could go very easily to education, to health, to welfare, and to business owners. And I think that the fact that this government has failed in really coping with this pandemic and with this crisis really also represents the bigger picture of the system and of the priorities of this government. It's not, the pandemic didn't create the problems. I think it just put the problems on the front where we could actually see them very clearly. It surfaced the problems. It surfaced the years and years of neglecting, of under budgeting for the different systems that we have. So now we're after the end of a partial end of the second closure. And I think that you could see that smaller businesses are starting to open again. What is sad is that you see that not all of them are opening. If you go just right down here on Mikveh Israel in Tel Aviv, right under our office, you could see that there are, I think, around 10 shops in the street here, and you could see that 2 of them actually closed completely. They just didn't make it. And it's very, very sad to see that, to think that this small business belonged to a family, belonged to a mother or to a father, and they just lost their income. They lost their business, and they probably have had that business for years. So some businesses actually did decide to protest and open their businesses despite the closure, despite the instructions of not opening them. That's also because they are it's a sign of protest. It's a sign of, we're not agreeing with these policies. You cannot choose our health over our livelihood or our livelihood over our health. The government's responsibility is to make sure that we are also healthy, which absolutely justifies the closures and the limitations. However, when you decide to do that, it's the government's responsibility, and it should be its priority to make sure that these people do not starve, that the people who are affected by these closures do not actually lose their source of income.
On social media, Israelis talk about fundamental issues. Handicapper Bill says Netanyahu screwed up like his bosom buddy Trump. A2P says even before the coronavirus pandemic, Israel had one of the largest income gaps and poverty rates. A second nationwide virus lockdown has widened those gaps, dealing a new blow to an economy already hit hard by the first round of restrictions. Avi says restaurants also had a responsibility to act responsibly. Too many did not extend outdoor seating, did not have them or staff wear masks, and did not take health or safety measures. Yes, they should have an economic safety net, but they need to take responsibility as well. According to Anne, what is the evidence people were getting sick in restaurants? We have no data. Infuriating.
בסופרים כן התייקרו, לפחות ב-20%, זה משמעותי. ועקב המצב זה עוד יותר משמעותי. גם המשכורת שלי יורדת וגם עולה בסופר, שזה קצת הזוי.
לפי מה שאני זוכר, בסגר הראשון הסופרים כן העלו מחירים ולא תמכו באזרחים שהיו במצוקה. לגבי דברים שאני צריך וזה, יש דברים... חיפשתי נגיד נעליים, ביגוד, זה לא היה לי שירות, כל החנויות היו סגורים. אז כאילו בסופו של דבר אפילו לחיות חיים סטנדרטיים בן אדם לא יכול.
אני חייל משוחרר מהצבא וזה פוגע לי בעתיד. שלא יהיה לי עבודה, הרבה אנשים פושטים רגל, אין לי מקומות עבודה. אם אני עכשיו לא עוזב פה, רוצה לחפש מקום עבודה אחר, אז זה בעיה. כי אין איפה לעבוד. השוק מת.
אם אתה מדבר על רשויות העירוני, אני לא רואה את זה שיש התעניינות. הרשויות הממשלתיות, כן, עוזרים. אני לא יודע אם זה מספיק לכולם, אבל יש עזרה ממשלתית, מה שנקרא. עירונית, בזמן האחרון ראש העיר הודיע שהוא לא ימנע מעסקים לפתוח, כאילו לא יעשה להם דוחות, אבל אני לא יודע, עוד לא נתקלתי בזה. כי לי מותר לפתוח. לפי ההגדרה, אני רשאי לפתוח. אבל לא שאנשים יוכלו לשבת ולשתות.
The Bibi regime has taken over so much of our solidness, our proper livelihood here in this country, and we don't feel like we have democracy anymore. We feel that for escaping the law is going to be stuck there, and we're going to be stuck forever in a state of some kind of a new monarchy. That's what we feel we have here.
No, we have to separate between the protest, which is growing and which is now lasting for many, many weeks, which is namely directed at Netanyahu and has namely to do with the charges of corruption that he is confronting. This is one episode. Corona and business who cannot open or are rebellious is another episode. They not necessarily mix together. The core or the majority of the protests against Netanyahu, the demonstrations which take place almost every evening and for sure every weekend, those protests are mainly political protests against Netanyahu without any connection to the economy or to the pandemic.
Israel is slowly opening up businesses again, but it's been months since they were required to close, that it won't have meaningful impact on the economy. Israel's GDP contracted by 28.7% in the second quarter of 2020. That is the sharpest decline in 40 years, according to a report released by the Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics. This while private consumption fell 43.4% in the second fiscal quarter. Israel's debt-to-GDP ratio in 2020 is expected to reach some up to 80%. In September, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, forecast that Israel's economy is expected to contract 6% this year. Israel's economy was showing signs of instability even before the coronavirus pandemic. In fact, there was a political deadlock for about a year that shook the economy, and then the pandemic dealt the final blow. For now, many Israelis say that they've lost hope and trust in the regime and its failure to help them. Here's the news making the press in Israel. The Jerusalem Post. Some 22.7% of Israelis, 938,000 people, were unemployed at the height of the second coronavirus lockdown, according to the Central Bureau of Statistics. Calculus reported. The statistics refer to the first half of October and are based on a poll of the workforce. Ynet News. Israeli Knesset member Bezalel Smotrich called for Israel to apply sovereignty over the occupied West Bank before the next U.S. presidential term begins, in the event Democrat nominee Joe Biden wins the 2020 presidential elections. Polls say over 60% of Israelis favor the Republican president over Biden, the former vice president in the Obama administration. I-24 News. Israeli armed forces destroyed the homes of some 80 Palestinians it said were built without permit in the occupied West Bank. The United Nations has called the move the largest demolition operation conducted